Hey guys, we're here again today at Hardracing, working on our KTM RC390 project bike. Today we're going to be installing these Driven rear sets. Driven is one of the top quality aluminum manufacturers in the US of rear sets and sprockets and man, tons of triple trees, tons of parts, all made from aluminum, CNC machined, anodized, just top shelf quality parts. The best part about it, of course, it's made in the USA. Not only are you supporting the USA, you're also got very easily accessible replacement pieces. So, just in case your bike falls over, you break something, damage a part, they're in California, they can get it out to you in a day. So, it's not a big deal. That's the real nice thing about having, especially for rear sets, readily available replacement parts. Even a bolt, a screw, whatever, they can get it to you even if you can't find it at your local hardware store. These, we've got rear sets on many of our other bikes. These are completely adjustable, multi-piece design. They can do standard shift or GP shift. But first and foremost, the quality, the fit, the finish, the craftsmanship on these things is just impeccable. They really take a lot of time to make these things fit right, work right, and just overall top shelf quality. And we'll show you how easy it is to install these. Coming up next. Alright, so to swap the rear sets out, you're going to need to remove the swing arm pivot bolt. That means you need to support the bottom of the bike with either a jack stand, some blocks of wood, hang the frame from the rafters if you're inside a garage. But one way or another, you guys support the bottom of this, because when you pull that pivot bolt out, if you didn't, all this would... So right now we have it on race stands. We're going to first remove the belly pan, so that way we can put something underneath either the cat or the back of the motor. But for starters, you're going to go ahead and remove the belly pan. Screws here, a little pop out right there, and then just remove the belly pan so you have clean access to underneath. Alright, so once you got the belly pan off, you need to loosen these three bolts that hold the rear sets to the bike. The nut on here, and on the other side, you got nuts. And you want to do all the hard physical untorquing before you put your bike on its somewhat sketchy layout, because at the end of the day, nothing is as sturdy as it's sitting on the ground. So when you got the back of this held up with a jack stand, you don't want to be sitting there torquing down everything. So go ahead and loosen all the bolts, and then once you do that, then we'll go ahead and lift the back of the bike up. Alright, so what you want to do also before you take your stuff off is tape measure from the floor to your pegs, so you have a reference on the distance, or the difference I should say, between the top of this and the top of that. And the same thing for the shifter side. Right now this is 16.5 and 15, so it's an 1.5 inch drop to the brake pedal. And on the other side with the shifter, we've got it at 2.5 inch drop to the shifter pedal. So you kind of want to do that ahead of time, because that way when you mount up the rear sets and you put everything where you like it, you don't have to like guess and put something bolted up and get it all done, go out and ride and say, oh man, my pedal's way too low or way too high. This saves a lot of headaches down the road. So go ahead and measure just for reference. Like I said, the floor to the top of the foot pedal, and then the floor to the top of the shifter and the brake pedals, and that way you have references on the distance between the top of this and that, basically how much lower the pedal is on each side. And also what you want to do before you start unbolting the big stuff is the back here is the master cylinder bolts. It's a lot easier to loosen those now than after you pull this off and you're trying to do it in your hand, because these things obviously are torqued on there. So anything you can loosen ahead of time while it's bolted to the frame. You don't want to take it off, just keep it, just loosen it up. Makes it a little easier down the road. Once you got the stuff off, you can just take it off with your fingers as opposed to sitting there trying to torque it with one hand while you're holding it with the other. Alright, so we loosened that bolt, the nut on the back side of this one, this nut here, and the bolt on the other side. So they're loose, not anything flopping out. You loosened your two reservoir bolts here, and now we're going to pull the pin out for the master cylinder, so that way when we take this off, the master cylinder can just come right off. We're not having to sit in there fiddle with it with the brake line trying to hold it up. Alright, so what we got here is, right now we got ours on the front race stand to support the front, and then the rear we have it under the cat holding up the rear. So basically, as you can see here, the stand now is not really holding, it's just barely just sitting there. So when we remove these bolts, it's not just gonna fly up, or actually it would go down. But basically now the tension is off of these, so we can pull these bolts out. You really want to have the driven plates ready to go, so when you pull these out, you put the plates on and put the bolts right in. The less time you spend without having these bolts connected, the better. Alright, so first you want to go ahead and take the left side off, and then you'll see on the back two bolts to take the kickstand off, because the new one has its own bolts. So you're going to basically pop those two off. And this is going to be kind of a pain unless you got a impact wrench, because you're going to have to put some torque on it. Unfortunately, unless you could get under there with a wrench earlier, just going to have to get a good leverage on it and loosen those off. And those had Loctite on them, obviously. So when you put the new ones in on the driven, blue Loctite, you basically want to use blue Loctite on every small bolt or medium-sized bolt. You don't need to put it on this thing, but everything else that you're assembling, blue Loctite. So you go ahead and get those tightened down, blue Loctite, and you can go ahead and reassemble this to at least have it up there. I'm not going to crank it tight, but at least get it started. Don't forget to put your chain guide back on top of. Alright, and on this side, basically, once you pop the other side through a little bit, just pull it nice and carefully. Again, try not to shake the bike too much. And I just thought of something you could do, I just thought of to help kind of make sure nothing gets too out of whack, is go on the other side. Once you get this halfway out, go on the other side and get a rod or a big thick screwdriver or an adapter like this, and shove that in to chase this to keep everything aligned. So when you pull this thing out, you're not going to be doing this for very long, you're just basically going to pull it and shove it back in there, but at least it'll help keep everything aligned while you're doing it. back side, got all the little clips. Basically just open those up and work the electronics and the hydraulics out. And then now, this is why I said earlier to loosen them. Now all you have to do is just hand instead of trying to torque them right now. And also why you pulled the pin out of the bottom of the master cylinder. So, boom, done. Out of the way. Put that back in there. And now you can put the right side on. And it comes with these two aluminum spacers, which are going to replace the two that were merged together in the stock. So this is no longer there, and it's replaced by these two aluminum spacers. So we will take the bolt, a little blue Loctite there would probably be a good idea. You don't have to go crazy on it, just a little bit. And then you put those out of the way. And just gingerly put that on there for right now. Alright, so you want to make sure the lines are above the two barrel spacers back there and below the swing arm. And basically the master cylinder is going to be like that, so it's not going to hit anything. You're going to zip tie it against the rear set so that it doesn't rub the swing arm, but just make sure they're above the two barrels right there. And now take your axle without this, whatever that thing, nut spacer. So, and just stick that in there and pop it all the way through. And if it doesn't go through smoothly, don't smack it in there. That means something's not aligned correctly. Alright, so you definitely may wind up, there's a whole bunch of bearings, inner and outer, on the swing arm on both sides. So either have somebody helping you kind of shimmy in the swing arm, or just take some load off, but whatever you do, just don't smash it because you're eventually going to damage something. It should go in lightly tapped while you do it. But again, it may get a little funky with the bearings, so you want to kind of have somebody taking a little load on and off while you smack it in there. So again, just take it easy. Hold the hammer like this. You can't hit it too hard. Don't hold it out here and beat the crap out of it. Otherwise, when it comes through the other side, you may have damaged something. It's really not that hard, but you just gotta make sure you're careful and gentle with it. So now you're gonna have this bolt here, and then this one is the one that comes from the other side. Again, make sure both spacers are on the back side, and all your cables and everything are above both spacers. You go ahead and put a little Loctite on this one here, just a little bit. Actually, that one's a lock nut anyways, so you don't have to worry about it. And go ahead and torque down now these three, the nut on the back side of this, and these two right here. So real quick, just wanted to point out here, when you're putting the left side on, make sure that spacer and that chain guard is in this orientation. It's real easy to push the bolts through, and if that spacer slips down, then basically your bolt's not going through the middle of it. So just make sure that it's in that same orientation as you see there, with the spacer right here, and then the chain guard facing outwards like this, and then those two bolts go through it. And then you're going to go ahead and put the nut back on, and this goes to 100 foot-pounds, and these go to 36 foot-pounds. The owner's manual says 36, driven says 45. Obviously it's whichever one you want to go with, but we'll stick with the manual 36. If you want to go halfway in between at 40, either way it's not really going to hurt it. Alright, so next you want to take the brake side and figure out where you want to mount the foot peg. Obviously there's 6 holes, adjustable. So basically you just choose which one you want based on your personal preference. We're going to start with the top middle little blue Loctite on the back bolt. Put that through there. And you may notice the knurl on these is super aggressive, which is obviously what you want for road racing, so your feet don't slip off of it while you're in a corner. If you're using it on the street, it's going to wear through your boot pretty fast, so if you want to, just take a file, some sandpaper block, sandpaper block, but most likely just a file. And all you're trying to do is just take off the very, very tip of it. You don't need to grind them down to where they're bare or anything. Just take a little bit of aggressiveness off it. It's total personal preference, but again, if you're not using it on the road racing track, then it's not really need this aggressive of a knurl on it. So once you get that on there, go ahead and torque it to spec. That's an 8mm bolt, and their directions show the 8mm bolts, and the 8mm bolts go to 25 foot-pounds of torque. So put that on there. Make sure that your foot peg is in the right orientation. Don't have it upside down or sideways. Get that right, then just go ahead and torque it down to 25 foot-pounds. Now, again, more personal preference. If you have a long foot, this distance isn't that big a deal. 6.5 inches. The stock one is 6 inches, so it's not that big a deal. If you did find that you needed to have the toe piece a little closer, you can just loosen that bolt, put it in the next hole back. Again, that's what's so beauty about these rear sets. They're just fully customizable for any setup you want. So next you're going to go ahead and install the master cylinder on the back with these bolts here and nuts. Just loosen those off. And of course, blue Loctite, you need to put that on both of those. Go ahead and mount your master cylinder. Alright, so next thing you need to do is adjust the plunger. Obviously, as you can see, stock setup, it's way up there, so you need to bring it down to like that. And you do that by taking that little jam nut, loosening it, and then spinning the plunger up so that it's basically longer from end to end. Alright, so just stick like a wrench through that way, so that way you can loosen the jam nut. And make sure you've got plenty of thread, so go ahead and screw it all the way out. Set the nut for maybe like a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and then thread it in. That way you know you really don't want to be any less than that. And then go ahead and put it on there and adjust it. Alright, so once you set your height on your plunger, go ahead and tighten down your jam nut. And you should have some free play in it. If you don't have any free play, it's going to be pushing on your brakes all the time, and that's not good, so make sure you got a little free play. Then go ahead and put your washer, your stock washer on it, and your clip, your pin, put that back in there, bend it back around the pin here. So you got your cotter pin going through your plunger pin, and then you're ready to bolt these things up to the back plate. So you're going to take the included bolts, and again, make sure Loctite, very, very important. Blue Loctite always. And then those will go down to 25 foot-pounds. Again, double check. Always check before you go out riding. One quick thing, as per the directions, obviously your stock one had a whole bunch of clips that kept the brake line away from the swing arm. Aftermarket rear sets don't have all those clips, so you just need to take a black zip tie, any color zip tie, and all you're doing is just running it around the back of the brake line and hoses, and that way there's no chance for the brake line to be rubbing the swing arm as it moves up and down behind it. So make sure you do that, because over the course of a long time, the swing arm eventually will wear through your brake line, and you don't want that. Alright, so next you want to go ahead and start to assemble the shifter side by obviously putting the foot peg in the same hole that you had for the brake side. And same thing again, just make sure that the foot peg is upright, don't want it upside down. And then torque that to 25 foot-pounds. Alright, so next you want to go ahead and put the shifter side on. Again, Loctite on the bolts. Foot-pounds. Now you've got to decide whether you want standard shift or GP shift. So if you want standard shift, you mount it down here, and if you want GP shift, you mount it up there. Alright, so a couple things. Like we just said, down here the directions show for standard shift, up here for GP shift. We already had ours in GP shift, and it's kind of funny because you can actually just retain this here, and now you're still in GP shift, because this for standard shift comes down here, and then the rod would go all the way like that. It really, you can do it either way you want. It's personal preference if you want to mount this up here to go down to there for GP shift, or if you want to have it up here and just go straight. Either way, it's still doing the same thing. So, totally personal preference. They show here in the directions to put the spacer in the back and then you put that in there again. Blue Loctite here, and then you would basically set your shifter toe piece to the height in relation to your foot peg. We have ours about 2.5 inch drop. That's about 2.5 inch drop. So then you'll tighten up your jam nuts, and then you're all set. Alright, so last little thing when it comes to shift linkage, whether it's this bike or any other bike, you always want to try to have all your leverages at 90 degrees with your arms. Obviously this one's slightly smaller, maybe like 70, 75. We'll probably wind up flipping it around, put it down there to get a true 90. But for right now, we're just going to try it out, see how it works. But the key is to always have your arms leveraged 90 degrees to the shift rod. And that gives you the most movement and the most leverage off of the rod. Just think about if it was like this, it wouldn't even be able to rotate it forward. So you always want to try to have the leverage arm and the rod 90 degrees to each other. So make sure you test everything out, feel it out, make sure it's all tight and snug before you go out for a ride. Nothing worse than missing a bolt or a nut that you thought was tight and it rattles loose while you're out riding it around, and that's not good. And as the directions say, after about 200-300 miles, double check all your bolts, make sure they're all tight, because these things do come loose sometimes. You should, as long as you blue Loctite everything, nothing really should come loose, but it's always good to just double check. So if you have any other questions or comments, just give us a call, Facebook us, email us, check our forums. We'll get you taken care of. If you enjoyed our video, please click thumbs up and subscribe if you want to be notified when we make future videos, which we're going to make a bunch of videos for the RC390 and a lot of parts which cross over to the Duke. So regardless of which bike you have, a lot of these videos will cross over. So for more information on the actual product, check out our website at hardracing.com.